I'm Anthony, and I'm a painter. This is Paint, a series of paintings about making a painting, and we will follow different processes during the course of these videos. Today we're looking at the drawing. So first of all, I think we should try to define drawing, and in English I have found the Wiktionary dictionary entry, and we can see that the word is quite old, from Middle English: to drag, push, pull, draw, draw out, to go, to make, and add. From Old English, dragon, dragana, and from Proto-Indo-European to draw and to pull. This is very important. We have the idea of pulling in the word draw, and of course that's the most common, well, the most common meaning is with the pencil, to draw with a pencil, but it also means to pull something with force. In other words, he drew a sheaf of papers from his bag. There are many ideas of that movement, also to construct, to assume a position in the sport of curling, golf, billiards. It has different ideas, but here's very important: to attract or to exert an influence on, to induce the mind, eyes, attention, etc., to be directed at or focused on something. From the moment she entered the room, all eyes were drawn on her. And I want to continue with this idea, because the idea of drawing in this phase is to set up a relationship with the dimension of the painting and what is going on inside. Hello, I'm in the studio now, so I wanted to talk about the painting, the dimensions of the painting. We have decided this is a 20 by 30, and so we have a proportion, and we're going to talk about how to use drawing in this phase. So the idea of drawing is very complex. We'll see drawing in different phases, but in this phase, we're going to use drawing for transferring the image onto the surface, okay? And that requires a proportion, right? We're going to think about composing this surface in a way that is harmonious. We're again talking about geometry. We're talking about numbers and proportion that are harmonious to the outside of the painting. Okay, let me just show you, for example, if I take a piece of paper and I fold it in half, you see, magically, this is a proportion that is harmonious to this. It's 1/2. You see, the same form is repeated. And if I do it twice, you see, this is a quarter of this dimension. So I'm using these lines for composition. They will give me harmonious relationships with the outside of this piece of paper. It shows me where the center is. It gives me 4 quadrants of equal dimension, of equal proportion to the outside surface. And so why is this important? This is important because the consideration that you have for the dimension, all of the elements that go into the painting are harmonious. I have some examples that from books. You can see that there are proportions, ways of using geometry which we have in nature, because that's where we actually draw from. We're drawing from nature. We're looking at nature. We're looking at the things in nature that reflect this idea of geometry. Geometry is like the magic code. So by using this, painters, constructors, everyone can benefit from the innate beauty that is in nature, in this geometry, and we'll look at some examples of this.
The golden ratio isn't just linear or rectangular. Within each golden rectangle is a smaller rectangle and a perfect square. If you draw between the opposite corners of each progressively smaller square, it forms a golden ratio spiral. There are millions of examples of that spiral shape in nature, in flowers, pine cones, and shells, even in weather patterns like hurricanes. And in our solar system, the Milky Way is a spiral galaxy.
The point about using geometry and geometry for composition, we can see in a couple of examples how this geometry is superimposed on the surface in order to create a harmonious relationship. Okay, that's the point. This is not easy. Geometry has a lot of variables, and so you can really experiment. And as a new painter, this is something that you should try to do is experiment with ways of using geometry for your composition. Experiment with extremes, the square root of 2, the square root of 3, double one dimension for the side, the twice of that for the height. You can experiment with this, and I think that in the case of music, we have these musicians who used these scales so much in the last century with the jazz. They used the numbers, the harmony that are the scales in music. People like John Coltrane played scales and scales, and so that became, those numbers, that proportion became part of his expression. He automatically expressed things according to certain harmonies that he had learned. Now, when we go to painting, moving away from the Renaissance, I think that painters have really forgotten this beautiful factor or element. If you consider someone like Jackson Pollock, who was an expression of improvisation, he was a using this idea. Well, I'll just pour paint. Where it falls, and that randomness, okay, there is a possibility of finding proportion in randomness. But John Coltrane was not finding proportion in randomness. He was a monster with proportion. And so what came out was a very, very subtle and beautiful harmony through his own interpretation. And I think that, by experimenting a lot with composition and geometry, you can also train yourself to actually see these relationships when you're composing. Drawing is, for me, an act of painting. It's an integral part of painting. And I think that what I really want to get back to in the definition is you are focusing on something. When you're drawing, you're not only drawing for yourself, but you're drawing the viewer. You're drawing the viewer into something. And we will see the act of drawing while we're painting that is the same. It has the same idea that we're taking our energy and focusing that energy onto a particular, a detail in the painting. Okay, I think that in terms of the Kabbalah, this part or this process of the painting is still linked to Chokmah, the second phase. And Chokmah is the uppermost of the Sephirot. It's on the right side, Kav Yamin, the pillar of mercy. And in the tree of life in Kabbalah, that is a very important position. You're coming from Keter, and you're going to Binah. And this is a Sephirot that is associated with wisdom. And it represents the first step in the creative process. So my idea of the surface and the drawing, this is still the first idea. It's the first process. It's the first reality, because what we saw in inspiration in the first video is still not in reality. And this instead is reality.